Well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and start with the introduction, and then hopefully people will join us and catch up with where we are.
Good.
But I just want to welcome everybody who's already on the camera right now on screen. And before we get started, I do want to tell you that we are recording this session. Welcome today to our June AARP New Hampshire Coffee and Conversation. And the theme today, the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. I'm Jill Martin, and I'm co-hosting today's conversation with Alan Cohen. We're both AARP New Hampshire volunteers, and our guest speaker this morning is Melissa Grenier from the Alzheimer's Association of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And we've got a few other AARP New Hampshire volunteers on the screen. Karen is helping out, and Betty, and we may be seeing Bev to do the registration, but we're all very active volunteers with AARP New Hampshire. We do have a few housekeeping items. Please be sure to mute your line by ensuring that your microphone icon has a line through it. This helps eliminate background noise. But we would love to hear from you this morning. So if you have a question or a comment, use the chat box, which is, at the bottom of your screen, access through clicking the chat button. And there's also the questions button there where you can enter any questions that you have. At AARP New Hampshire, we are focused on the health, the financial security, and the social connections critical to the well-being of our 50 plus community in the Granite State. We carry out our work through targeted advocacy at the state and federal levels, compelling engagement of the 50 plus community statewide, and serving as a trusted resource for information for our members and for the public. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Alan Cohen.
Thanks very much, Jill, and good morning, everyone. Alzheimer's is a brain disease that causes a slow decline in memory loss, thinking and reasoning skills, disrupting a person's daily life. There are 10 warning signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's that should not be ignored. Knowing these warning signs can help determine if you or someone you care for should speak to a doctor. Early detection matters. Our guest speaker is Melissa Grenier, licensed clinical social worker, who is the regional manager for the state of New Hampshire of the Alzheimer's Association of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. She has worked for the Alzheimer's Association for over 10 years, providing the programs, services, trainings to those with memory impairment, their loved ones and caregivers, the public, law enforcement, and first responders across New Hampshire. She has worked in areas of elder guardianship, home care, geriatric psychiatric care, and long-term care for over 18 years. Melissa, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. I understand that you have a PowerPoint presentation that you'd like to share with us.
Yes, I do. I'm going to, hopefully does everyone see a purple screen that says, know the 10 signs? Okay, good. I see nodding heads. And so, yeah, so I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to work my way through. Is it okay if I go ahead and get started, Alan?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, so welcome everybody. Again, my name is Melissa Grenier. Please feel free to jot any questions you have down in the chat, or just keep them in mind for the end of the presentation. This is a program that will focus on the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. I like to refer to these warning signs as red flags, or things that you should be keeping an eye on if you start to notice them. So one of the things that we see a lot are myths. We want to kind of bust some of those myths and clarify some information about Alzheimer's disease and typical aging. That's a question we get asked a lot at the Alzheimer's Association. So one of the myths about Alzheimer's disease is that, or dementia rather, is that having a little touch of dementia is a normal part of aging. The reality is that as we age, some of our abilities do change, including our memory. We might have some minor changes in our memory, but having a harder time remembering some things is very different than having some form of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, where those symptoms are much more significant and constant and start to impact a person's ability to function independently. So another myth, if I have memory loss, that means that I have Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. And thankfully, the answer is no. Many people have trouble with their memory, but it doesn't automatically mean that it's some form of dementia. Most people don't have dementia, actually. They may have another medical condition that is impacting their thinking and their processing and things of that, their cognitive abilities. So whenever you notice changes, it is best to visit your medical provider to see what's going on. It could be a new medication that you're having side effects from, could be interactions between medications, could be depression, could be an electrolyte imbalance or a vitamin or a mineral deficiency. It could be a lot of other things, an infection, could be a lot of other things besides dementia. So let's talk about what exactly is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive degenerative brain disease, which means that it destroys brain cells, causing problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. If you can imagine that we have, if a person is over time losing brain cells, by quite a lot, then on the outside, we're noticing those changes that the person is experiencing. Maybe they can't tie their shoe anymore or read the newspaper, but on the inside, they're actually losing brain matter, brain cells. So dementia is a general term used to describe a decline in cognitive functioning. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. I get asked that question a lot. Does dementia lead to Alzheimer's? Is Alzheimer's worse than dementia? So those really aren't the case necessarily. Alzheimer's is one of many, many types of dementia. So if we think of dementia as a broad overall term, we want to know, if someone's going to the doctor, what type of dementia they have, because they all have slightly different symptoms and they may have different treatments and interventions as well. So some treatments do exist to help with symptoms related to Alzheimer's disease, but at this time, we do not currently have a cure for Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's at this time remains a fatal disease, an irreversible condition. So let's go over some risk factors for Alzheimer's. And if you see me looking away from the screen, it's just I have two screens at my computer. So I'm here with you, but the presentation is over here. So, so let's go over some risk factors and how they affect you. So the biggest risk factor is age. So what that means is that as we get older, our risk for developing Alzheimer's goes up, but it's not a guarantee. So over the age of 65, a person has about a 1 in 9 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. And over the age of 85, there's about a 1 in 3 chance of developing Alzheimer's. But I'm a glass half full kind of person. And so if someone is over 65, they have an 8 out of 9 chance of not developing Alzheimer's. And if they're over 85, God bless them. And they have a 2/3 chance of not developing Alzheimer's. So the odds are still in our favor, despite the fact that we're aging and our risk goes up. So we also know that women are disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's. And what I mean by that is women develop Alzheimer's disease more often than men, and women tend to be caregivers more often than men. And the incidence is higher in women, largely due to the fact that women live longer than men. However, over the past few years, I've been trying to keep an eye on some research that's been going on that's looking at hormonal and lifestyle factors that impact women, and they're looking at whether those things are impacting the increased incidence in women. So being a woman increases our risk. As we age, getting older increases our risk as well. So there are some genetic components to Alzheimer's disease that have developed and been found over the past, decade. There is a gene, APOE4, which is linked to a greater risk of late onset Alzheimer's, which just means Alzheimer's over the age of 65, which is probably what most people think of when they think of Alzheimer's. This type of dementia is most common and associated with older age. I don't really like that they call it old age. I think older age is better because 65 is not old in my book. So it's a good idea to discuss the benefits and risks of genetic testing with a physician or a genetic counselor, because they want to tease out whether or not the results of that type of testing is going to be helpful for you. They want to make sure that you're obtaining that for the right reasons and in the right way. One thing I do want to say, however, is that genetic testing is not widely available to the public at this time. You can't just go into your primary care office and say, hey, can you add an order for that, Alzheimer's test to my, lipids and my blood work for my physical, because they probably won't do it. A lot of times right now, your insurance won't cover that type of testing. And so that's really prohibitive to most people. And you also probably would need to have a strong family history of people in your family that have developed Alzheimer's disease in order for the doctor to, warrant, writing an order for it. So there are a lot of factors that go into maybe a person's decision to obtain genetic testing, whether they can afford it, whether their doctor supports them in doing that. A lot of times these days, genetic testing is available through clinical research trials, and it's free to do that. So having one of these genes will only increase your chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. It does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to develop the disease. As a caveat to that, I do want to say that there is a very small percentage of families in the world as a whole that do have a gene that is a deterministic gene, that is a very strong familial gene that does almost guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's from family member to family member. So there's actually research studies being done on those specific families to see why that is. But for the most part, genetic risk factors are it's hard to know whether you have those genes related to Alzheimer's in the first place. So what we say at the Alzheimer's Association is that, what's good for your heart is also good for your brain. So, we want to really merge the connection between our body and our brain. So having a healthy brain comes from a healthy body. So whether that's eating better, being more active, being more social, exercising our brain, all of those things are good. A person's risk for Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, which is another type of dementia, is increased by a damaged heart or blood vessels. So that means that if you have chronic cardiac conditions or other vascular issues, that may very well increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's or a vascular dementia. And a vascular dementia is basically when there's a lack of oxygenated blood flow to the brain. So the damage in the brain from vascular dementia is caused from a lack of oxygen, whereas the damage in the brain caused from Alzheimer's disease is a buildup of a couple of substances we sort of refer to as plaques and tangles. So when you think of dementia, just think of damage happening in the brain. And then when we determine what type of dementia it is, that can tell us where the damage is coming from or how it's happening. So diabetes in midlife can lead to Alzheimer's disease decades later. There's been a lot of research done on the link between diabetes and an increased risk of Alzheimer's. So that is really important to be aware of. And there is a strong link between serious head injury and a risk for dementia. So we always want to protect our skull, protect our brain at all costs. So now we're going to get into kind of the meat of what we're here for. We're going to talk about the 10 warning signs. The one warning sign that people typically think of and relate to Alzheimer's disease has to do with memory changes, particularly short-term memory changes. So things like what you had for breakfast or that you called your doctor's office earlier in the day, things like that. But memory changes, not just the fact that they happen, but that they happen and they're impacting a person's daily life, their overall independence. So things there are some examples here: forgetting something recently learned, asking the same information over and over again. Hey, honey, when's that doctor's appointment? Oh, it's Thursday at 2 o'clock. Okay. Honey, when's that doctor's appointment? It's Thursday at 2 o'clock. So if you see that repetition, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's Alzheimer's, but it's something to keep an eye on. And relying on memory aids or family members for things you used to handle alone, relying on, taking notes, or relying on other people to manage a lot of the things around your household, or manage your medications or your doctor's appointments, things that you would have otherwise done, that can be part of this as well. So those are some examples of when we think of memory changes that disrupt your daily life. These are just a couple of quick examples of that. Memory loss is typically seen early in the disease process with Alzheimer's disease. That's not the case with other forms of dementia, for instance, vascular dementia, which was referenced either the last slide or the slide before. Vascular dementia memory tends to impact a person a little bit later in the disease process for someone with that type of dementia. A lot of times with vascular dementia, a person will have issues with their frontal lobe. So things like understanding abstract thought, reasoning, judgment, awareness, things of that nature. Those tend to be impacted first with that particular type of disease of dementia. So another warning sign: challenges in planning or solving problems. So that could look like a lot of different things. That could be problems developing or following a plan. And that could be, like, later on down the list, a recipe is a plan. You need certain ingredients, you need certain tools in order to work them together to create a certain result. And that can become more and more difficult for someone that has Alzheimer's disease. Problems working with numbers. So a checkbook, you have to organize a checkbook and your bills a certain way and keep track of them in a certain way. And that can become much more difficult. Challenges concentrating can also be a concern. I know plenty of people that I've worked with over the years that, for instance, loved reading the newspaper from front to back with their morning coffee or what have you. And now they skim it, and they can't concentrate long enough to really enjoy it anymore. So they'll skim through it and then say, okay, what do I do next? And, they tend to move from activity to activity pretty quickly because they have trouble concentrating and focusing. And when it comes to this particular warning sign, a person may take longer than before to do a common activity, like, for instance, washing the dishes or doing the laundry. You may need to break down the steps of those activities in a much more finite, simple way in order for those tasks to get done. So challenges in planning or solving problems is another warning sign. And besides the memory loss, these, sort of warning signs 2 through 10 are in no particular order. I mean, we list them and they're numbered, but they're not necessarily going to appear in someone in this order. Another warning sign: difficulty completing familiar tasks. So again, if I was, I like to bake, and my dad does carpentry. So if I started having trouble baking, that would be a warning sign to my loved ones. And if my dad had trouble in his shop, in his garage, working with tools and creating things in the wood shop, that would be a warning sign for me. So we want to look at what's a familiar task to the person that we're concerned about, because what someone would consider a concern for me, sorry, that was a timer. What someone might consider a concern for me may not be the same concern for someone else. Like, I would never judge my dad on how his baking is, because he's not a good baker to begin with. So, so difficulty completing daily tasks, just basic things. Trouble driving a motor vehicle. That's pretty common for most folks until they have to retire from driving, which is how I refer to it. Problems, again, managing a budget, and having a difficult time remembering the rules of a favorite game, or maybe, Red Sox, or whether it's, a game on TV, a professional sports game, or whether it's a bridge club, or, things like that. So another warning sign has to do with confusion with time or place. And this has a lot to do with knowing where you are how you got there, and sort of what time it is, what day it is, what season it is, what year it is, things of that nature. So a lot of times people will forget dates and seasons, and just they'll misunderstand the passing of time. So 5 minutes might feel like 5 hours to some people, and 5 hours might feel much quicker to other people with dementia. So another example, forgetting where one is or how they got there. One quick example is when I was in college, I was a pharmacy technician, and I had a gentleman who came to pick up his prescription. It was just an everyday kind of average transaction. And he left, with his prescription. He came back an hour later and said, "Oh, I'm here to pick up the prescription." I said, "Oh, Mr. Jones, you are already here. You already have it. You paid for it. You're all set." He said, "No, I didn't." And he got really confused because he didn't realize he had already been there, and he was adamant that he hadn't been there. So I called his wife, who was another customer of ours, and she was so worried because he had gone to pick up his prescription and should have been back home in 20 minutes, and he'd been gone for a couple hours. So that's an example of, forgetting where one is or how they got there, and misunderstanding time. Another warning sign, trouble understanding visual images and spatial awareness. This is really significant when it comes to safety. So for instance, going up and down stairs or driving a motor vehicle, those are two examples that I get concerned about when someone is starting to have visual issues. But issues with color and contrast are also common. And I know so many voracious readers out there who have a really tough time with having to reduce or eliminate reading in their lives. That's a real passion for so many people. And when we talk about trouble judging distance, if there's a lot of clutter in the house or in any particular environment, that can be difficult for someone with visual or spatial issues, because they might trip on them, bump into them, and we don't want injury caused to them. So the next warning sign has to do with problems with communication, whether it's speaking or writing or reading. A person may have problems following or joining a conversation. In Western culture, we kind of have an ebb and a flow to how we enter conversations, participate in conversations, and maybe even exit a conversation, and that becomes trickier. They may stop in the middle of a conversation, and they might get distracted and just walk away, or walk towards what's distracting them. They may repeat statements or questions over and over again. And they also may start to have trouble with their vocabulary, and their vocabulary may sort of dwindle and diminish over the years and as the disease progresses. And certainly we do know that people will mistakenly call a pen something else, that is very common. So again, there are ways to communicate with folks with Alzheimer's disease and to manage that. So, we are going over these pretty quickly today, but just know that the Alzheimer's Association, is here to support people with whatever symptoms they're experiencing, and their caregivers and care partners as well. Misplacing things is also a pesky warning sign. It becomes very troublesome and frustrating for the person living with memory issues and their care partners and family members. They may put things in unusual places. They may have an increased difficulty retracing their steps and locating those items. And they may end up being so convinced that they didn't misplace those items that they start accusing others of taking those items. So probably the oddest thing that I have heard from a family member is that they were looking for someone's tennis shoes, and they looked and looked and looked. And then one day it was hot outside. They went in the freezer to get some Rocky Road ice cream, and there were the tennis shoes behind the ice cream. So, that's kind of a silly example, and it's kind of, frustrating for the family. But what we get more concerned about is when someone is misplacing important documents or insurance cards or wallets and things that people need on a regular basis or that are really critical and important. Another warning sign has to do with poor judgment. As the disease progresses, the frontal lobe of the brain is impacted, and that's where our reasoning and our judgment and our awareness and insight are located. And so poor judgment is definitely a big warning sign that has to do with safety in a lot of different ways, but the overall well-being of the person with memory changes as well. So changes in decision-making and judgment look like maybe giving away personal information, account numbers, or money to people or places that they may not otherwise have given it to, giving large amounts of money, or again, that personal information to telemarketers or some stranger who just calls them up on the phone. Spending money much more impulsively than they had before. Another example could be wearing clothing that's inappropriate to the weather. And what I mean by that is not, wearing brown slacks with black shoes. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be fashion forward. It just means, someone is going outside in the middle of a snowstorm with just their slippers and their nightgown on to, check the mail. That should be a big warning sign. That's an example of someone not wearing sort of weather appropriate clothing. Or sometimes people will go outside with 3 wool sweaters on and a heavy coat, and it's 95 degrees outside with humidity in the summertime. And that may not be the healthiest thing for those folks either. So those are a couple examples of that. Withdrawal is also a significant warning sign. People withdraw from things that they used to love to do. So whether it's the Reds, watching Red Sox games, whether it's joining in family functions, whether it's volunteering or working part-time, there's still a lot of stigma related to Alzheimer's disease. And a lot of people are embarrassed that their symptoms may be starting to show. And so they end up pulling back often from those activities that they love to do. And we really want to encourage them to not do that. We want to encourage them to participate in activities, those activities and socializing. Those are all really good things for our brain, actually. So here are some examples: avoiding social situations. That's very common. The last warning sign I'm going to talk about has to do with changes in mood or personality. So it's not the greatest thing for someone to be agitated or anxious or depressed all the time or fearful. And so if someone is displaying those things regularly, we really encourage them to go see their provider, because that's not a great way to live. That's not a great quality of life. And it could be related to dementia, or it could be related to maybe, a mental health issue, maybe depression, maybe an anxiety disorder. It could be a lot of different things. And so we don't want a person to be living with high levels of anxiety and agitation and not feel like they can do anything about it. So mood and personalities do change. Sometimes they change for the better, meaning someone could be, kind of rough around the edges, so to speak, and and then they become big pussycats, or someone may be very thoughtful and kind and always helping out in the community, and then they end up being really cantankerous and using cuss words, and they just seem like a totally different person. And so again, mood and personality changes can work both ways. But if you see a mood or personality change, that's certainly not a normal part of aging. So we really encourage people to learn about the warning signs of Alzheimer's disease, because we want you to run, not walk, and go see your medical provider so you can see if it is a form of dementia or if it's not. Because if it is some form of dementia, then you can do more about it the earlier you obtain the diagnosis and figure out what interventions are going to be appropriate. So you're going to get the maximum benefits from any available treatments that are out there. There are more options for relief in symptoms. For instance, with Alzheimer's disease, the medications related to Alzheimer's disease work better the earlier they're introduced. It can help a person remain more independent for longer. You can participate in clinical trials. You have more time to plan for the future and make decisions. So there are a lot of incredible benefits to getting an early diagnosis. Right now, there are several FDA-approved medications out on the market to help with the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. There was a medication, actually, I think it was launched a year ago today, a new medication called Aduhelm, which is a disease modifying treatment, but there's a lot of work that's still being done to test the medication and see what its efficacy is. And anytime someone is talking about a treatment, it's always best to run that by your medical provider, of course. These are some tips for planning for the future, getting some, legal and financial things, squared away, especially legal documents, making plans for what the person wants, in terms of, medical care, naming a person to make decisions on their behalf, should that be needed. So again, there are a lot of benefits to an early diagnosis, and we certainly do encourage people to go see their medical provider whenever there is a change in their physical, mental, or cognitive functioning. And this is the Alzheimer's Association's 24/7 helpline. It is literally available nights, weekends, and holidays for your convenience. And there will be someone on the other end, like myself, a trained, clinical social worker or clinician who will be there to answer questions, get you a resource, and everything in between. So I think at this time I'm going to turn it over for Q&A, I believe, unless Alan, you tell me if I'm going out of order.
No, that's great. Thank you, Melissa. But as I'm sure that as you're going over the 10 warning signs, what was probably going through all of our minds, certainly mine, is, oh my gosh, on occasion, I have episodes of some of those things, sure. Hopefully a rare occasion. Should we be concerned?
I think that if you have rare occasions of some of those things, that is very normal. I walk into a room and forget why I went there. I, make a mistake in my checkbook. I forget the name of people I haven't seen in a while. It takes me a while to figure out where I know them from. So I would keep an eye on those things, because what I hear from family members and what I've observed is that when they think long and hard about the symptoms their loved one started experiencing years before their diagnosis, they start out as those kind of rare occurrences, and they become much more frequent, to the point where it starts to impact their day-to-day functioning. So what I would say is, if those occurrences are impacting your functioning, whether they're rare or constant, you should definitely have them checked out and go consult with a medical provider. But in general, if things are happening infrequently, there's less of a concern.
Okay, great. I noticed that on your earliest slide, you mentioned the term late onset. And I know I've heard that people have early onset.
Yes.
And I just wanted to know, are they two separate diseases?
So that's a great question. They are both considered the same disease, but we call them two slightly different things because of when they present themselves. So young onset Alzheimer's disease is a type of Alzheimer's disease that develops under the age of 65. So the youngest person I have worked with was 39 years old when they developed the disease, and 41 when they were diagnosed. It was a woman I worked with years ago named Cindy, who's since passed. So young onset Alzheimer's, again, is when it develops under the age of 65. That is not very common. So I want to just, hopefully put some minds at ease that is not the most common type of Alzheimer's disease. Most of it occurs over the age of 65. And that is what is referred to as late onset Alzheimer's disease, meaning later onset in terms of age. But they're both Alzheimer's disease. They both have the same symptoms. One thing I will just mention quickly about young onset Alzheimer's disease is that the pace of the disease moves much more quickly than someone who is over the age of 65. So that woman, Cindy, I just referenced, who was 39 when her symptoms began, 41 when she got diagnosed, she passed about 5 years later after her diagnosis. And sometimes people later on in life, they can live 10, 15, 20 years. The pace of the disease is usually much more slow after the age of 65, if that helps.
You mentioned earlier that Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. Are there more than one type of Alzheimer's?
I think that there's a lot of research going on that's looking at Alzheimer's disease in much more detail in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's so much research going on as it relates to Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's disease develops so differently from person to person that there are some researchers that think that perhaps in the future there might develop, definitions for different types of Alzheimer's disease specifically, but we're not there yet. But that is something that some researchers are curious about. And again, what we say at the Alzheimer's Association is if you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease. So maybe the question is like, why is that? Are there different types or are there not? And, I'm not doing clinical trials. So, I will leave that up to the researchers. But for right now, we link, we sort of pool everything that is diagnosed as Alzheimer's under one condition. But, research, who knows what research will show us in the future.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Jill actually had a comment, and she said, my aunt had a fall with a traumatic brain injury, which triggered her cognitive decline, leading to dementia and Alzheimer's. Are falls a major cause?
I think anytime that we have damage happening in the brain or to our skull, that it can increase the likelihood of a cognitive impairment. I think that knowing many people in my life, unfortunately, that have had traumatic brain injuries, there are cognitive issues associated with just the traumatic brain injury. And someone can also then develop Alzheimer's disease, which is another layer of cognitive impairment on top of what was already there from the traumatic brain injury. So the traumatic brain injury alone doesn't necessarily guarantee that a person is going to develop Alzheimer's disease, but it certainly doesn't help. Their brain is damaged in certain areas. It weakens the brain, and so it's certainly worth getting a diagnosis of both of those conditions to see if a person has both.
Kat asked, has research shown that epilepsy has any relation to Alzheimer's disease? And if so, in what way?
So I have been asked that question a lot. Maybe not a ton, but I've been asked it several times in my career. And I haven't seen personally research that's come through that shows a direct link between epilepsy and Alzheimer's disease. However, sort of similar to what I was just referring to with the traumatic brain injury, if someone has a chronic epileptic disorder, that can over time cause damage in the brain that may look like Alzheimer's disease, but that is really caused from seizures or their epilepsy disorder. But again, I know that's kind of a half answer. I haven't seen again anything that directly relates epilepsy to Alzheimer's disease. But I know several people with epilepsy that have cognitive issues, but the cognitive issues are from their chronic seizures rather than another form of damage or another condition.
Ray asked,
Yeah.
Are the warning signs for dementia also the same for Alzheimer's? And if so, how do you know the difference?
That's a great question. I think that, so these 10 warning signs are specific to Alzheimer's disease. However, many other types of dementia have overlapping symptoms with what we just referenced. So for instance, vascular dementia, which I mentioned earlier, was a lack of oxygenated blood flow to the brain. Memory may not be the first thing that a person experiences with vascular dementia, but someone with vascular dementia definitely experiences withdrawal and issues with judgment and awareness and insight, and they start to have trouble doing regular activity, normal common activities. A lot of the symptoms overlap, but I don't want to lead someone into believing that all of these 10 warning signs are, for instance, guaranteed with Lewy body dementia or frontotemporal dementia. There are different symptoms that relate to lesser lesser known or less common types of dementia than with Alzheimer's disease. So I want to focus on these 10 warning signs being specific to Alzheimer's, but just know that other types of dementia have overlapping symptoms as well, but they also have their differences.
One last question from,
Sure.
from our audience. Ray asked the following question, which is, I've gone through chemo and left with kind of a brain fog. Does chemo have any relationship to Alzheimer's?
Again, I've heard that from plenty of people over the years. And I think that has to do with the mechanism that the chemotherapy is working on the body to kill cancer cells and to impact the cancer. So I do hear from people that they are left with a brain fog, but I haven't seen research that would directly link, say, a person's receipt of chemotherapy increasing their risk of Alzheimer's. So I think that most likely the fogginess or the kind of cognitive, any cognitive issues that a person may be experiencing is a result of the chemotherapy only, and I wouldn't necessarily be concerned that they're developing Alzheimer's if they've gone through a regime of chemotherapy recently.
What resources or programs can the Alzheimer's Association can provide to people who are experiencing some sort of the warning signs and also their caregivers?
That's a great question. And I think that, you should still be seeing the slide with our toll-free 1-800 number. I'm sure everyone, if they wanted to, actually have written it down if they wanted to. Here, I'm going to unshare my screen if I can find out where I put it. So our 24/7 helpline is really kind of the gateway to the mothership, as I like to call it. Anyone can call. I literally have middle school students who call and they want some information or, for a project. I have clinicians from Mass General who call on behalf of their patients and want resources. We can provide someone with something as simple as a support group list, all the way to supporting someone who's making the tough decision to place their parent or spouse into an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility, and really everything in between. So we can provide a lot of information and referral, but also more in-depth consultations via our helpline, and all of that is provided at no cost. And we can work with a family or a person as little or as often as they need us to. Sometimes at the beginning of a change in status, a change in a person's condition, we'll say, a family might need a lot more support, and then that tapers off. So again, people can use us as little or as much as they want. And earlier on, Alan, when you were reading my bio, you had mentioned, that I do trainings. And so a lot of what I do personally, but also what the Alzheimer's Association does, is education and outreach and support groups. So I'm the only one who does our law enforcement and first responder trainings in New Hampshire. And I do that at the police academy. I do that at local departments. And it's really important because those folks are the ones that are going to people's homes to help in, if there's a wandering incident, if someone had a slip and fall, if there's a domestic dispute, those are the professionals who are going out, and we want them to be well equipped with tools and strategies to work with people with memory loss. So those are a handful of the major things that we do at the Alzheimer's Association. But again, I just want to focus on the fact that what we provide to the community and to people living with the disease and caregivers is absolutely free. So people can utilize our toll-free number or visit our website, or they can contact me through AARP, if there's a specific concern. But we are available all over the state. So even though our office in New Hampshire is in Bedford, we do serve the entire state of New Hampshire.
Great. So this is a good time to give a plug for any of the advocacy work that you do and also for your central walks in September.
Yes, thank you. So we do also promote advocacy, and we many times work in conjunction with AARP and other statewide partners that we have to promote advocacy on a local, state, and federal level that supports people living with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, or their care partners, or a whole manner of things. For instance, we just had 3 of our pieces of legislation pass through the House and the Senate in New Hampshire. One of them is to increase Medicaid reimbursement rates. Another one is to change language around how people can use the Alzheimer's respite grant, our state-funded respite grant. So those are a couple examples of statewide legislation that we have, but we also really pursue local and federal legislation as well. And when it comes to how do we, if we don't charge for anything, how do we sort of, provide our services? And that is through, one of the major ways we do that is through our Walks to End Alzheimer's. And our Central New Hampshire Walk, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire, is taking place on Saturday, September 24th, I believe. It's the weekend of the 24th and the 25th. Alan, the one in Portsmouth, is on Sunday, the 25th, I believe. They're all in September. We also have walks in Keene, New Hampshire, and Upper Valley in Hanover, New Hampshire. So all of those are at the end of September. They're a great awareness building event, and they are also our biggest fundraisers so that we can support all the work that we're doing without having to charge.
Great. Thank you very much, Melissa. This was really a terrific program, and thank you for speaking about Alzheimer's and warning signs and the resources that are available. And to everyone else who has been listening and participating, thank you for joining us today for today's Coffee and Conversations. I hope that the information and the resources will be of value to you. I would encourage all of you to visit AARP's website, and you do not have to be a member of AARP to access it. We'll put up a link, which is aarp.org, and check the AARP New Hampshire website often, which is aarp.org/nh, for more virtual programs coming soon, including cooking demonstrations, paint and sip events, gentle yoga, and yes, more coffee and conversations. If you're interested in becoming an AARP New Hampshire volunteer, please email us at New Hampshire NHAARP@aarp.org. Thank you all very, very much. Take care and be well.
Enjoy your day. Thanks, everybody.
Very good, Karen. I guess it's just you and me, but thank you very much for being the architect and being the prima facie host for today.